it was interesting when Charles was given the definition of the word leadership, that when that definition is being given, it really gives no reference to the quality of the human being or exactly what they are leading people to do. You know? So with that thought in mind, we need to understand that people within our congregations, people within the body of Christ, young people, children that are being raised, and every category of life that are a part of our history, they're being led somehow and by somebody. And that we, no matter what our role of life might be, we have the capacity to lead. The questions are really going to come down to, in what ways am I leading? Am I leading for good? Am I leading? So that brings us to our specific message this morning that speaks of Jesus' leadership training, specifically of his apostles that would take on that responsibility when Jesus' time on earth was over. I might have told you some of these last year, but I wanted to share today a couple of illustrations that have to do with my youngest son, Christian. We call him Gid.
Gid.
But I remember when Gid was a young boy playing Little League baseball, and he played t-ball, and he liked to watch the Braves on TV. And it was around that time that Christian was developing into, started with t-ball, but now he comes into machine pitch and that kind of thing in baseball, that he began to watch Gary Sheffield. Do y'all remember Gary Sheffield playing for the Braves? Great. And Gary Sheffield had incredible bat speed. And so Gary Sheffield could stand up there for the Braves, he could take his bat, and when they would pitch it, he could literally turn his bat facing the pitcher, bring it back, and still swing and just hit with great velocity and great power. And was an all-star caliber player and everything that went along with that. Gary Sheffield had the bat speed to do that. Gid did not. But he just watched him, and he tried to swing his bat like Gary Sheffield did. And one of the things that it forced me to discover was it would have been so much better had Dad gotten to Christian to help him learn how to hit before Gary Sheffield messed everything up. It's easier to teach a blank slate. Don't ever take for granted the opportunities that we have to train skills, leadership skills in somebody when they're in very trainable positions of life, when you're not having to correct a lot of baggage. Don't miss prime time. One of the things I've noticed at the church building there in North Tuscaloosa, and it was the case at Cottondale where I preached before that. Just basically, I think it's a pretty general observation, is that young boys are attracted to the front of auditoriums. You let services be over, and you take 2 and 3-year-old boys, and they're running up and down on that stage. They're just drawn to it like a magnet. Let them be 45 years old, and you can't get them up there if they're playing a reel. I mean, there's prime time where we develop and we maintain some just kind of personality traits, and it's hard to start over. So we need to kind of keep those thoughts in mind. Not every leader's a good one. That people lead one way or another. That we all have responsibilities, and there is a prime time to teach and to train. And that brings us to Jesus dealing with his apostles. I want us to start by spending a little time in Luke chapter 6. And I'll say, I don't have this resolved at all. I struggle with it. It's a struggle for me trying to differentiate between Jesus, the Son of God, and Jesus, the human. And one of the ways that's kind of a struggle for me is trying to piece together what he knew versus what he's experiencing. And one of the ways that kind of comes to my mind is here in Luke chapter 6, when he's about to select the 12. And an interesting thing about the selection of the 12 that I don't know that we always really think about, but I think it's important for us to consider, is the 12 apostles were selected from a grouping of disciples of Jesus. Okay? They were disciples of Jesus. They were followers on one level or another before they ever became apostles. Okay? Keep that in mind. And then look at what Jesus did in Luke chapter 6. The Bible says he prays all night. Now I know he's the Son of God. I know he's deity. I know he knows things, but I also know he's got a big decision to make that next day. And he is spending significant, valuable time going before the throne of God in prayer. How many times in your life you prayed all night? All night. Going up into an environment where something was so significant that you dedicate that kind of time to this selection of those who would take on this responsibility to lead. And so these 12 are selected. And I want us to always keep in mind when we think about Bible characters and even when we think about our own lives that we live moment by moment. God knows big picture, Jesus knows big picture, but we live moment by moment. And those 12 were selected to serve as apostles of Jesus. And the truth is, they were Judas Iscariot's not thinking about betrayal here. He's not thinking about 30 pieces of silver here. He's not thinking about what's going to happen that you know is going to happen. And I think that can be one of the most challenging things we face in Bible study, particularly as it relates to stories involving characters, is that we read them knowing how it works out. They were living a moment by moment. And look, he didn't pick 12 perfect men. In fact, he picked 12 men who were going to struggle, eat the best of them, even after he selected them. But they were men who were going to be chosen to take on a role of leadership that Jesus valued so highly that knowing he had a brief period of time of ministry, it was still going to be so very valuable for him to dedicate significant time to the training and to the development of these men. Now, our primary text is going to be found in Luke chapter 5. And we're going to be talking specifically about 4 men who were called to be disciples. And all 4 of these men would ultimately, in chapter 6, they would become apostles. Their story is very relevant for us. But I also want to mention this. I think one of my very favorite sports movies is Hoosiers. And one of my favorite movies ever. And I think Gene Hackman played the role of Norman Dale who was the coach, and I think he's probably the greatest movie character, TV character coach of anybody. I just think he was just great. And I tell you, for a guy that wants to preach or teach, that movie is just filled with point after point after point after point that would be so good for us to use in settings like this. And there was one specific context of that movie that I want to reference right now, and it was a choice that was made by this coach, Norman Dale, of this basketball team. They didn't have 12, 15 players on the team. They just had like 7 or 8 guys on the team at this particular time, and it's early on, and they're struggling because he's trying to teach them a discipline, and he's trying to teach them a work ethic, and they're playing a game this particular evening, and there's a young man on the team, and he's obviously good and had a significant role the season before when the team was pretty mediocre, and he's out there on the court, he's playing, and he's playing more in a different way than the coach wanted to. He's taking shots the coach didn't want him to take, and he might even be hitting the shot, scoring, but he's not playing like the coach wanted him to play. His name was Ray. And Norman Dale pulls him out of the game. And when he pulls him out of the game goes on, but ultimately, their team has so many players foul out that there are 4 players on the court, and this boy Ray is the only one on the bench that could go in. So he starts running toward the scorer's table, assuming he's going in the game. And as he was making his way onto the court, Coach Dale stopped him and told him to come back. And everybody's shocked. And the official makes some kind of comment to Coach Norman Dale. He's got 4 players on the floor. He's got an eligible player that he's telling to come back. And the coach says, my team is on the floor. They play the game with 4 players. The remainder of that game, which was significant adversity, they lost the game. People thought the coach didn't know what he was doing. But it was all about his training for the good of the team. And the reason it stuck out to me so much for this, where we're going to go with this message this morning, is sometimes you sacrifice the moment for the good of the big picture. They played with 4 people on the floor. Ultimately, they were state champions in the state of Indiana. Sometimes you sacrifice the moment for the fulfillment of the big picture. Remember I was telling you about Gideon? I remember he was a young boy. I'm pretty sure I told you this one last year. I remember when Gideon was a young boy, he wanted to help Dad take the garbage can to the street. One of the lessons I learned pretty quickly was this. It would have been a lot easier for me to take that garbage can to the street by myself than to have that little boy struggling along with me trying to carry it. The moment was tough. But for the big picture, it said, let him help you. Let him help develop and train him for what he needs to be. Jesus sacrificed a significant amount of what you might call his time for the good of training others who would be integral after he was gone. And you're going to see that displayed a good bit here in Luke chapter 5, because Luke chapter 5 is what I want to kind of call a combo story. Because in reality, 2 significant things are happening at the same time here in Luke chapter 5. Now what we're introduced to as the passage begins is that there was this multitude that pressed about him to hear the word of God. He stood by the lake of Gennesaret. He saw 2 boats standing by the lake, the fishermen had gone from them and were washing their nets, and he got into one of the boats, which was Simon, asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and he taught the multitudes. And that sounds right, doesn't it? That sounds about right, that Jesus is teaching the multitudes. That sounds like exactly what the fulfillment of his purpose. The Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost, to teach, to share, and he's doing it. He's got multitudes that are interested in what he's having to say, and they're listening to him. Meanwhile, he's asked this man Simon to push him out in the boat so he can teach. And it seems like while Jesus is teaching, and it doesn't give us a number for multitudes, but I'm guessing it's big. When I think multitudes, I'm thinking big. He's teaching this significant, large number of people. While at the same time, there are these random fishermen that are here on the shore area that have been fishing all night. By the way, I think it's worth me noting for you that in Luke's account of this story, James and John are going to be mentioned by name. Peter's going to be mentioned by name. Andrew's not going to be mentioned by name. But we know him to be there, we know him to be included, and we know him to be a part of this training process, and we know that by the time we get to chapter 6, and Jesus prays all night, and he selects the 12, that yes, he's going to choose Peter, and yes, he's going to choose James and his brother John, and yes, he's going to choose Andrew, whose name is not even mentioned in Luke chapter 5. Maybe there's a little subtle message there for us that sometimes leaders are obvious, like a Simon Peter. Sometimes leaders are very influential in the shadows, like an Andrew. But they're a part of the same moment when Jesus is going to bring them to a level of leadership that will ultimately change the world. Jesus is going to leave them with a ministry that he does not complete. But yet these men are going to be a part of a group that's going to accomplish to the known world, his message is going to be completely shared. Jesus doesn't get that done by himself. Mm-hmm. But he does bring along others. I wanted to pause here, and we want to talk about some of the specifics here in Luke chapter 5, but I want to remind you of what a verse says in John chapter 13 and verse 15. Are you familiar with this one? John 13, 15. I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Now, question. Do you remember the context that comes from? That is just on the heels of Jesus washing these men's feet. You remember who he chose in Luke 6, including those 4 that we're going to talk about in Luke 5? By the time you look at John chapter 13, and we're getting close to the end for Jesus, he's going to wash feet, and then the passage is going to say, I've given you an example, I've given you some training, I've shown you the way, I've given you an example of what you should do. By the way, can I give you a little tidbit for whatever it's worth? Here's a little tidbit, in case anybody ever asks you. John 13 has nothing to do with washing feet. John 13, the washing of the feet is not even it's not even a major part of the story. It's the event that happens, but the feet washing is not a big deal. Clark, how do you know that? Here's how I know that. Because depending on what version of the Bible you're looking at right now, you're either seeing words like supper being ended or during supper. Jesus gets up, takes a basin of water and a towel, and begins to wash. If it was about the feet being washed, he'd have got up a lot earlier than he did. It wasn't about the feet being washed. It was about a task needing to be done. And here's what Jesus did. And you can check me if I'm wrong. I think I'm right. Everybody in that room had the opportunity to wash feet before Jesus got up. That's no kidding yourself, man. Everybody there knew what needed to happen. They're having a meal. It was a part of their tradition. It was a part of their decor. It was a part of their dress. The feet needed to be washed, and everybody knew it. It was a task that was usually reserved for the most common of servants. And nobody got up. I don't know whose turn it was, but I know whose turn it was not. And so with supper being ended or during that meal, he gets up and goes around and washes feet. And then he says, I've given you an example that you should do like I've done to you. And what's that message? If you're gonna lead like me, if you're going to be my disciple and following my step and be recipient to my training, when a need is presented, you're going to get up and do it. How about this? You're willing to go first. How about this? You're willing to get dirty and sweaty. How about this? You're willing to do tasks that need to be done that not everybody really wants to do. And how about this one? I think it's pretty important. You can stand behind a microphone and preach to thousands, and you can get in the closet and clean feet. If you're going to be like me, I did this in front of you so you can learn. And then here's one of the keys for our concept today. Obviously, they are grasping a concept they don't know about. For some reason, on some level, whatever the explanation might be, every single one of them knew this was something that needed to be done, and yet every one of them rationalized in their mind, it doesn't need to be done by me. Somebody else will do it. I'm guessing if they're like human beings, if they're like human beings I know, and good night, if they're like the human being that lives in my skin, then they might have been sitting around thinking, well, I think Matthew needs to get up. I think it's his turn. I figure they all had a pretty good idea of who needs to get up and who doesn't. And I figure most of them had pretty much rationalized in their mind, Jesus doesn't need to get up, I don't need to get up, everybody else is wide open. And Jesus gave them plenty of time. And nobody got up. So his message is not really about feet. His message is about serving and following his example. And he said, I did it. So you will do when I'm gone. You'll do when I'm gone what you're witnessing me doing right now. I gave you an example that you should do as I have done to you. And then we get back to Luke chapter 5. Jesus preaching to the multitude. Simon, and Jesus said in verse 4, when he had stopped speaking, remember he's speaking to the multitudes, then he says specifically to Simon, launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And you see what's happening here is Jesus is transitioning two clear purposes. I'm going to teach the masses, but I'm also going to teach and train this small group that's going to take on this great responsibility when I'm gone You need to launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And by the way, isn't it interesting? This goes along with a lot of stuff you were saying, Charles. Isn't it interesting that Jesus is using language with these men they can understand? They are literally fishing. Simon is literally going to say, we fished all night. We didn't caught anything. But at your word, we're going to do what you said. They cast the nets on the other side. And the Bible doesn't give the number, but it does say in verse 6, when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their net was breaking. So you're entitled to your view on this. I'm going to tell you my opinion. My opinion is, I bet you this was their best fishing day. What do you think? I mean, the nets and the boats can't even handle it. They're bringing John and James to help in the process. They can't. So don't you think when they obeyed Jesus, they had their best day? Best day. Multitudes are being taught, but leaders are being trained and developed. You put your faith and trust in what Jesus has to say, the one who's going to say, I gave you an example that you should do as I have done to you. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' feet. Depart from me, for I am a sinful man. He and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish which they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on, you will catch men. Transition to a different kind of fish. Best day. Best day. So when they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. Now, what does that mean? They left their best earthly day on the beach. When it says they forsook all to walk in his steps, that means something. They didn't give up their junk. They gave up their best. Let's be honest about it. Those fish on the seashore weren't doing anything. You know, that's not, it was their best day. And it's not doing anybody any good. And see, and I think this group, we understand what it really means to make sacrifices in order to be followers and to lead as Jesus would have us lead now that he's gone. We understand what sacrifice is really all about. You know? And what it's not about. And some days we're called on to make sacrifices of a big nature, and sometimes we're not. And understand this, what might be sacrificial for you might not be a big deal to you. But if I'm living it in my skin and it's a big deal, it's a big deal. What they were called to give up was something that meant a lot to them. And they sacrificed it, and they left it, they forsook it to begin to be followers of his. And Jesus prayed all night. And he chose all four of them, even though Andrew's name is not even mentioned in Luke chapter 5 in this context. Not even mentioned. Simon Peter, Bacon, Sonny, one of the great characters of the entire Bible. Here's the thing about Simon Peter. He's a leader in any room he's in. He's a leader in any room he's in, and, let's be honest about it, not only is he a leader in any room he's in, whatever he's doing, he's going to lead. Good, bad, that's who he is. But the message that Jesus shares with us in Luke 5, that he shares with us at Rock Creek here in August of 2019, is yes, I need Simon Peter to lead, but guess what? I need Andrew, whose name's not even mentioned, to lead. And that's the message that Jesus teaches. That's a part of that BLT concept. Everyone is a part, and everyone has a role. And they dropped and they forsook Have you spent much time in John chapter 4? Have you spent much time considering the woman? I'm not going to, I'll be pretty soon. But have you spent much time looking at John chapter 4 with the woman at the well? Have you ever thought about what happened? I want to just give you a few specific things, and then I'll stop. But I want you to notice this about John chapter 4. The disciples, the group, this select group, they go off. They go into a village to get food. Jesus is at this well, and this woman comes, and she's got her pot, she's a Samaritan, everything that goes along with that, and Jesus says to her, give me a drink. And then she says, and this is going to foretell of things to come, she says, how is it that you, being a Jew, speak to me, a Samaritan woman? And she didn't say these literal words, but this was her message. No Jewish man has ever spoken to me before. I mean, hey, this going to the well of my water pot, that's my normal. And it shocks me that this Jewish man is saying, give me a drink. How is it that you, being a Jew, speak to me, twofold, a Samaritan woman? Translation, I believe this is accurate. Nobody's ever spoken to her before. Well, you're going to progress a little further in the story. And you're going to find a couple of startling things. One, she's going to become a believer. She's going to leave that water pot behind. She's going to go to her home village. She's going to influence other people. And there are going to be many Samaritans who become believers before you get to the end of John chapter 4. But in the meantime, these disciples are going to come at a distance, and they're going to see Jesus talking to this woman, and this is what the Bible says they do. They marveled that Jesus was talking to this woman. Translate that part. Okay, here it is. I wouldn't have talked to her. I'm shocked that Jesus is talking to her. Translation, I wouldn't have talked to her. These are people walking in his steps, man. These are people who are the picture of us. And they're saying, I wouldn't have talked to her. And Jesus says in John 13, I have given you an example that you should do, that you should put into practice what you have seen in me. Hey, these are elite, man. This is Luke chapter 6. Jesus prays all night. This is Peter, James, John. This is Matthew. This is a distinguished list of Bible characters that you know very well. And they have come to the group conclusion, I'm shocked that Jesus is talking to her. I wouldn't have. But yet, because of what Jesus did, she's a believer, and many Samaritans are believers. Before you get to the end of this context, you better believe Jesus says, I gave you an example that you should do as I have done to you. And they forsook all and followed him. Now, here's what I want to say before I close. Probably didn't say it very well. Not, my communication skills surely are not the best. But what I've said so far today makes sense. It's the established pattern that Jesus set forward. He taught multitudes, and he trained this grouping, prayed all night, chosen, selected them to lead. That all makes sense. This passage that I'm about to read to you, it's hard for me to make it make sense. But I feel it's important for me to share. Based on our topic, Sonny, it's important for me to close with this passage, even though don't really make a lot of sense. And primarily one of the main reasons it doesn't make a whole lot of sense is because I know me so well. And because I know me so well, and to be honest, I know some of you, it doesn't always make sense. But this is what it says. These words are found in Acts chapter 1. Men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will so come in like manner as you saw him go into heaven. Are you kidding? Trusting me that much? Here's the next line. The next line from that scripture. Or the line I want to share with you. Then they returned to Jerusalem, and life went on. He's gone. Not to take another step. Totally entrusting this grouping, and make no mistake about it, totally entrusting us to carry on and lead after he was gone. Check yourself for a second. Frankly, I think sometimes God the Father and Christ the Son trust Clark more than Clark trusts himself. And I sure believe there have been multitudes of times they have seen in me what I have not seen in myself. They have asked of me the incredible, to carry on the message of Jesus after his departure. And here's the sobering reality me and you got to live with. We're going to lead whether we share that message or not. We're going to lead whether we carry it on or drop it. You remember what Gamaliel said? If this thing be of men, it will shut down. And how many generations has to go forward of us dropping the ball before Gamaliel proves to be right, even with the body of Christ in the state of Alabama? If we don't carry it on, because he left it with us, that was his way. That was God's way. If the message is going to go on, it's going to go on carried by us. That's why he took so seriously the training of his apostles for the leaders that they would be after his departure. People like us change the world. By the way, and I'm actually through. This is what you might call an add-on, but I tell you, I think with your story, separating it as a time period that we can't relate to and could not happen now. But you can be sure of one thing: the cast of characters is different, but the God and the Son are still the same. Mm-hmm. We need to put our faith and trust in him. We don't know what's possible. True. Thanks. Appreciate it.